Well, hello, my first customers. Wow, this is the A team right here. The A team is struggling. Oh, yeah. I forgot. I was going to send that. Angie, you know Bobby's son at work? Do you remember his name?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you know Bobby's son, the foreman, Bobby, his son?
Oh yeah, Tanner.
Tanner. That's right. I forgot. I was gonna give him the link and see if he wants to come crash.
Hmm.
Let's see. Invite. I think I'm gonna
Well,
go.
also one of our Lubies is leaving in like a week, so we might have a spot open.
Unbelievable. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
it's
try
the
to.
guy that goes unbelievable.
That is unbelievable. It's quite believable. Yeah.
So
I'm
he
gonna
thinks he's
give the. The problem is I don't know the. I don't know the new group all that well, but for sure I'm gonna at least. I'm gonna at least tell them somebody should come apply.
okay.
So I'm gonna shoot this link over to Bobby, and just in case the boy wants to come and visit, we'll do that. So how you guys feeling on A2 stuff? Scared? Nervous?
Still studying, reading some over some stuff.
Hmm. Oh, don't drag it out. Just make sure you get her done here pretty soon. So, yeah, that'll be good. We're gonna make it happen here. So I'm going to do this.
Mr. Kelly,
Hey,
Steve said we can set up that time whenever. Uh, it's just he works Tuesday through Saturday, but he'd prefer it first thing in the morning
sure.
if possible.
We can find a way. We can make it happen. Yeah, because that way he can get some stuff done still that day. That's good.
I
Yeah,
think the same might apply for Santi and Mark as well.
that's good. I make one trip out of it. Every week at 7 a.m. Wednesdays. So good. Well, we're going to do a couple different things. One being talk about some hybrid stuff, which I'm sure you're very, very passionate about. Very passionate indeed, aren't you? Yes, yes, you are. So start right off the bat. Let me just go ahead and refresh your minds on our timelines. So we have done a lot of stuff. We are officially way more than halfway through. And so this is where we ended engines back on October 2nd. We've been playing in automatic transmissions for a while, and we're now on November 4th. And so this is actually week 11. So we've got week 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. So 5 full weeks. This week is going to be hybrid and beginning of axles, CD axles, and drive shafts. And then 4 weeks for the manual transmissions. Um, what that looks like is, and today a little CVT and a little bit about dual clutch, but I tend to sometimes push dual clutch to manual because it works more like a manual. But clutches are after prop shafts and axles. Prop shafts just is another name for drive shaft. Two names, same thing. Like I said, clutches, gear ratios. So we did a little bit of math on gear ratios, but we're going to do more math on gear ratios. You love math. And then manual transmissions, manual transaxles, differentials, and four-wheel drive. So we got quite a few things. So if you figure our 4 weeks, we kind of look at like, this week is I'm not really totally counting as manual, even though we're now into the manual book. This week with prop shafts and axles is also very useful to automatic transmissions and transaxles. So let's call this week a half and half week. The 4 weeks after that will be clutches, basically manual transmission transaxles, differentials, and four-wheel drive. So each week is going to be pretty heavy and something new. So for that reason, I said a million times, you definitely want to have your A2 dialed in, because if you're still trying to study for A2 after this week, it's going to get crowded out with clutches, pilot bearings, and release bearings, and pressure plates, and flywheels, and slave cylinders and master cylinders. And I know those are offensive terms, but it's still what we call them. And so, and then next thing you know, you're like rolling right into the manual transmission transaxle. So don't come in here next week without that A2 buttoned up. Otherwise, I'm telling you, you're going to just fall further from it. So with that being said, let's focus on some of these things. So there are, there's a lot of different things that we could look at. I did recommend chapters 21 and 22. So 21 is CVT, 22 is hybrid. And, I'm going to say, let's chat about CVT first. I don't necessarily have like the best, Toyota doesn't really do a whole lot as far as curriculum on the CVT. So we'll go through some of the textbook chapters and try to talk about that a little bit. Anybody learn anything about a CVT while reading? Reading? What's reading? Hobbits? What's reading? I don't read. Okay, fine. Nothing. Well, I'm gonna break a CVT down for you. It's not the most passionate thing to me, but I'm gonna pull this off screen, put it back on screen. So when you hear the term CVT, what you need to really understand is it's all in this word, these two words right here. It's a continuously variable. So, we talked a lot about the automatic transmissions, how you feel the shifts, right? Maybe first gear is 3-to-1, second gear is 2-to-1, and third gear is 1-to-1. But on a CVT, it's continuously variable. Sometimes they call constantly variable, but continuously is a better word for the CVT. So what that means is when you, from a stop, you may start out at 4-to-1, and then as you get going, you'd think it'll jump to 3-to-1, but it won't. It will slowly, continuously vary the gear ratio from starting at something like 4-to-1 to 3.9-to-1 to 3.8-to-1 to 3.7-to-1 to 3.6-to-1. It'll continuously vary the gear ratio, slowly but surely. Now, anybody care to answer why we would want to do that?
Smoother shifting.
True, there's smoother shifting to the point where you don't even feel the shift. It's sort of like, what gear am I in? I don't know. You don't have a gear. You're in a CVT. You're in drive. So smoother shifting / no shifts at all. Any other ideas? Jamal?
Gas mileage.
Yeah, it's gonna help the mileage, but in a roundabout way. So I'm gonna break it down a little bit here. I'll leave this right here. So in a CVT, because it's continuously variable, it can keep the RPMs at a peak horsepower and torque level. So that kind of means like you'll push on the gas pedal, it'll rev up to, let's say if you're wide open throttle and this is an engine that redlines at 6,000, it'll probably rev up pretty close to 6,000 if you're wide open, and it's going to stay there, which means it's constantly putting the most amount of power down to the tires because it's in the engine's peak power range, right? So you've all seen the dyno chart. You get more horsepower typically in the higher RPMs until it gets to red line or close to it and it starts to fall off. they'll literally look at the engine output and they'll say, oh, the sweet spot, maybe the peak horsepower is at 5,800, but the peak torque's at 5,000. They'll look at somewhere in that range and basically program the CVT transmission control module to keep the engine RPMs in that range under wide open throttle. So technically, a CVT could maybe even make the car faster because it doesn't have the shift where it falls out of power. But Akram was saying for fuel mileage, so it doesn't sound like that's going to make fuel mileage better. But here's the thing. Because we can keep that engine in peak power and torque, that means we can kind of use like a smaller engine and still have the car accelerate reasonably. Because, the typical customer, they don't want to necessarily know their engine size or their engine horsepower. But if they go to test drive a Corolla and on the test drive at the dealership, they leave and they go to get on the freeway and the Corolla's gutless, trying to merge into traffic, they're not going to buy it. So ultimately what Toyota does, Lexus too, but ultimately, what all manufacturers do, they're going to try to make the vehicle accelerate in a way that's acceptable to the customer and a potential buyer. So if it feels like it's got some pep, as they say, they're good with it. Now, we can use a smaller engine and still have it be, quick enough. And if it's a smaller engine, generally we can make that be more efficient, better fuel mileage, lower emissions. So that's really the basis of why a CVT. Additionally, they are more simple. So we're going to talk about how they work. And for that reason, we can keep costs down. I don't remember what year the Corolla changed over, but it did. And that's kind of the point. So the Corolla has had a CVT for a while, although it's kind of a unique CVT. It's got a planetary gear set, and at least the newer Corolla, like the Corolla hatch, what do they call that thing? The IM, right? Abel's that right? I know you know. I think it's the Corolla IM, right? That thing has a CVT, but it's also got a planetary gear set, and it'll, in a way, have a 1 to 2 shift, but then 2 runs forever. Now, I've told you the positives of a CVT. The negatives of a CVT are mostly not real problems, kind of fake problems. The customers who get a CVT, they jump in it, they push the gas pedal, and the engines, the RPMs rev up, and then the car goes, but they feel kind of disconnected. Some people say it's almost like a rubber band feeling. It's sort of like delayed, and it's like you're not like, it's sort of like, and you're like, what is this? But you notice your RPMs are steady, but your miles per hour are cranking up. So it's doing its job, but the customers need to get used to it or need to accept it or, need to just not care. So CVT came out and a lot of people were like, something's wrong, my transmission's slipping. I'd say, okay, let's check it out. Wait, this is a CVT. Transmission's not slipping. This is just how it is. It's normal operation. So what's kind of cool is some manufacturers actually designed little fake shift points. So they'll let the CVT let it rev up a little bit, and then they'll drop it back down, and then rev up a little bit, then they'll drop it back down. They're almost making it like try to act like a regular automatic transmission, but if they were to totally have it work like a regular automatic transmission, they would lose all the benefits of the CVT. So they try to put some little fake shift points in there just to make it more familiar for the customer. So, so they're kind of fun, but covering some of what the book says, the CVTs are becoming so popular, so common that we need to really know about them. So about 10, 15 years ago, we, like, the typical technician didn't need to know about a CVT. They didn't want to know about a CVT. They didn't want to talk about a CVT. And then the rare case that a CVT came in, they would just like ship it out, just boom, sublet it. Saturn had them way back in the day. And like, I remember my transition instructor would always ask my friend Tyler, who worked at Saturn, he'd be like, you guys see any problems with that CVT transmission? He's like, yeah, they go bad and we just change them. He's like, you don't do anything? No, we just, if they have any problem at all, we just order a new one, throw the old one in the trash. And so like, that was how it was. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to be rebuilding transmissions and CVT transmissions, but the point being, if there's something that's failing, it's within reasonable expectation that we're going to do service. Now, who knows, there's an issue on a lot of these CVTs that's a service campaign right now. Anybody know about that one?
Is it the shift points one?
And what's the fix?
They reprogram it.
Right. Right. So they determined, there's some issues with the software. That happens all the time, right? I mean, your phones do updates, your computers do updates. Updates are just a thing. So they have an update for Corolla with a CVT. If it experiences X, Y, and Z, or I think it was that at first. I think now they may actually just be calling them all in. So if it experiences these various symptoms, or if they call it all in like more as a campaign, like kind of a recall, they'll rewrite the software and they'll make it feel more like what a customer would want, or at least more like what they're going for. But that's not fixing all of them. There are some actual CVT transmission failures. Anybody see anybody changing CVT at their shop? Go ahead, you give me a show of hands. You could speak up.
Yeah, plenty.
Yeah, they're definitely failing from time to time. Now, the way we replace and install a new CVT is generally it's the same as a regular automatic transaxle. If you were to look at it, the CVT looks pretty much exactly the same. It works different. The way we diagnose it is slightly different, but overall, the service on it's not so different. Now, if we were to go inside of the CVT, oh wait, we're gonna do that this week. It's totally different. Like, it's gonna trip you out. You're gonna say like, what the heck is that? Rather than, let's say a pure basic CVT, rather than planetary gear sets and clutches and bands and a valve body, it'll be literally a set of pulleys, a couple solenoids that control the position of the pulleys, and a metal band in there, like almost like a metal belt looking thing that's got little sections in it so it can bend. And literally that is the whole transmission. It's pretty crazy. But like I said, Toyota found that those didn't really feel the way they wanted them to feel. So Toyota's somewhere in between an automatic transmission transaxle and a CVT. It's got an actual proper first gear. That's also one of the ways they were able to give it reverse. So CVTs are good, inexpensive, they work well. They're hard to get reverse. So let me tell you just how difficult that is. How do we make reverse in our automatic transmission transaxle? In a traditional. Who remembers?
You hold the carrier, right?
I don't even remember, but you get the point. We're going to hold a different part and we're going to turn a different part. So I think if we hold the carrier and turn the sun, I think it'll turn the ring backwards, right? So like we use our gear set. If I just said a true 100% CVT doesn't have a planetary gear set, then how the heck are we going to make reverse? So see, when we took out the planetary gear set to do a CVT, now we have basically an input pulley and an output pulley, and the engine only turns one direction. So how are we going to make the output pulley turn the opposite direction? Cool idea. You guys know it. You've ridden go-karts. Anybody ridden go-karts? How many people have ridden a go-kart with no reverse? Most go-karts don't have reverse. Most go-karts don't have reverse because their transmission is a CVT. It just doesn't have a mechanism to make it go backwards. Same with a scooter, like a Vespa style scooter. They go forward like this. Right? But they don't have reverse. They don't have reverse because they don't need reverse. But a CVT is a good transmission for a scooter because they don't need reverse and the CVT can't offer reverse. So a company called Skidoo, Skidoo. What do you think Skidoo would make? You really pronounce it Skidoo, but what do you think they make? What do you think they build? What do you think they sell? Not skis, close. What could be have to do with skis and also an engine and a CVT?
Snowmobiles.
Yes. So Skidoo made a snowmobile, and most snowmobiles have CVTs. Partially, that's what makes them so stinking fast. Snowmobiles are fast for real. A good, like a big one, like you can get a turbo 4-cylinder, ridiculous fast snowmobile.
You had
Uh,
one, Kelly?
No, I never had one. My friend had one, and I tried to drift it and flipped it over on the ice and slid down a frozen lake. It was fun, but the snowmobiles don't really do it for me. It was always kind of they would be cool. Like, I think if you guys ever got the chance, you should definitely ride a snowmobile, but it is going to be cold. And for me, like I always said, when it's snowing, I can make money plowing snow. I'm not going to go play around the snowmobile. So like the best time to ride a snowmobile is when it's snowing. But what was pretty crazy was almost all those snowmobiles didn't have reverse. Then they started to get reverse, but in a weird way. So Skidoo made the snowmobile with a CVT. When you wanted to put it in reverse, it would actually shut the engine off for a split second, and then the engine would start up and it would sound really weird. They would actually run the engine backwards to turn the CVT backwards so it could have reverse. It was the trippiest thing ever when I first heard it because it did sound slightly different. And if you were to look at, like the little pulley turning, it was the engine's crankshaft basically was turning clockwise, and then you'd put it in reverse and it would like the engine would slow and then be like doop, 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 burp, 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 burp. And so what they did was they slowly but surely started creeping the timing back, killed the spark, so it almost died. And then they made the spark occur pretty far before top dead center. So it actually pushed back down on the piston. And then they were having it, like it's weird. They did it all with ignition timing and they made the engine turn backwards. So some fun stuff just to give you some background what the CVT looks like. I mean, you're literally looking at the CVT right here. Now, like I said, this is a basic CVT, something we could use in a go-kart or something. So on a car, we'd have to make it more complex because we need reverse on a car. So we've got a driving pulley and a driven pulley. In other words, this is the input and this is the output. And then we got this metal belt connecting the two. And then what's kind of weird is this one right here is a small diameter right now, and this one's a big diameter. So that means this is going to have like a lot of torque multiplication. It's going to have a lot of gear reduction. Does that make sense? But we can change the shape of these. We can basically, if we were to move these two pulley faces together, that's going to make the belt ride out towards the outside. What I mean by that is, check this out. Here's our input, right? And they're kind of spread out far apart. So the belt falls way in the middle, which makes it basically have to go around a very small pulley. But if you transfer straight over, you see how this pulley looks bigger? It's not actually. It's the exact same pulley. But because this surface is tapered, if we pull them apart, the belt falls in, it makes it small. But if we pull them together, it will make the belt ride outward, and that'll give us the equivalent of a bigger pulley. Now, if we have a small input pulley and a big output pulley, that's a lot of gear reduction for acceleration. If we were to have a medium input and a medium output that were the same size, what would our gear ratio be? Anybody? If the input and the output were the same size, what would our gear ratio be?
1-to-1.
You see how they work a little bit now? It's sort of like, it's the same as sprockets. So if we have a small input sprocket and a big output sprocket, that's like a lot of acceleration. If we have, a 20-tooth input and a 20-tooth output, that's 1-to-1 ratio. We're a direct drive. So this one will slowly but surely pass direct drive and then end up with a big input pulley. And the only thing it did is it's just moving these sheaves. These are called sheaves, not a shiv, not like, what I hear sometimes on, I think it's on Thursdays. Mexican got on boots or something, not a shiv, a sheave pulleys. We bring them in like this here. And when we do that, the belt rides the outside. Now you can see what's happened is we've squeezed the input sheaves and relaxed the output sheaves. So now we get a gear ratio that's more like overdrive. We got a lot of overdrive here. But you understand, we don't have any gears. We don't have any gear set. We don't have anything. We just have these two sheaves and we change them both proportionally. Does that make sense? Who's tripped out right now? Who is just like gonna lose it? You're keeping it together then, huh? So that's how simple the operation of a CVT is. Of course, it gets more complicated and there's other little details. And then how do we move the sheaves? And I could tell you on a go-kart, they have what's known as a centrifugal clutch. Some would pronounce it centrifugal clutch, but what that basically means is based on RPM, these sheaves will move. So when you rev the engine up a lot, it'll basically go into this gear reduction mode. But then as the engine RPMs fall, it'll kind of go more into overdrive. And that's why when you drive a go-kart, when you try to accelerate, you're like, and it's going, but you never hear it change. It's almost like the same RPM until you let off. And then it's like, boo, because your engine RPM control these sheaves, which move through centrifugal force. That's just how they just do their thing. On a something more advanced like a car, we're going to actually use a solenoid, and we could use some hydraulics to move these. So we may have like solenoid A and solenoid B. Solenoid A would control the input and solenoid B would control the output. Now, I've seen some codes set on those, but generally we haven't really done a whole lot of repair. We would just essentially change the CVT, but it's possible, that we may get to the point where we're changing, input and output, solenoid A and solenoid B. Maybe it might even get to the point where we're going to change the belt, but generally speaking, the belt is considered a lifetime component of the CVT, so we don't really do a whole lot. This is the hydraulic piston that's going to move the sheave, and so you can see we're going to pump up behind it, and that's going to be able to give us the gear ratio that we want. Basically, there's a tension spring. Here's an example of sheave position sensor. So we need to know the sensor. We need to know the sheave's position. So we use a position sensor, and we have that report to the TCM, and then the TCM will control a solenoid. This is obviously SST to perform the service on a CVT. Here's the belt. Basically what the belt is, it's a whole bunch of these little plates, and they're all like riveted together. And then, because there's so many plates, it'll allow for a little bit of flex. And that's how we're going to actually get it to go around corners, but still be strong. So this is a literal steel belt. So we don't anticipate a whole lot of wear on a steel belt. Should mostly last. Here's an example of the oil sprayer. So we spray oil on that belt to keep it lubricated, keep it cool, lower friction. If something were to fail on this oil nozzle, obviously the belt would get dry, it wouldn't have as much oil, and it would stretch. And so one of the reasons that we have basically lifetime timing chains is because the timing chain in the engine is basically either dipped in oil or sprayed with an oil sprayer. If you're thinking about this belt, this would have the same type of failure. If we were to not spray it, it would get hot and stretch. So as an example, on my scooter with a chain, I'm supposed to oil that chain every 300 miles. That's every other day to me. So that'd be on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. Like if I put that many miles on it, I literally have to get off my bike, put it on a kickstand, put it on the center stand, spin the back tire, and spray chain lube on the chain every 2 days. So if I don't, which I've not done my maintenance many times, but if I don't, what happens? Interesting. The chain gets dry, starts to make noise, like maybe just a little bit of noise, but very quickly it turns into slap. So like, why do you think the chain slaps when it gets dry for too long?
It's getting stretched.
Exactly. The second it has no oil, it gets hot. Then when it gets hot, that starts to kind of weaken the steel, and then it stretches out. And it was tight, but now it's loose, and now it starts to slap. And that's when I know, like, oh, I really needed to lube my chain. But now I need to lube and adjust my chain. And then, it's kind of the same thing. So we want something to spray it in oil constantly. It'll probably last a long time. That being said, this, the CVT has very different requirements for, it's more about lubrication than it is about pistons and clutches and hydraulics. So they have special CVTs, right? Nissan, Ford, Beck Arnley's a typical like European brand. I don't recognize this one. And here's, like an aftermarket version. Toyota's got their own CVT fluid as well. And I'm talking about a true CVT. I'm not talking about a Prius hybrid transaxle. So the Prius hybrid transaxle has their own as well. Now there's a lot of little different details. We've got different types of CVTs. I don't even really try to go super crazy, but check it out. How are we going to make a low and reverse gear ratio? Well, we may actually put a little gear set in a couple clutch packs, and this can provide a direct mechanical first gear. So rather than first gear being all rubber bandy, it'll be like you put it in drive and it feels like normal. And then you almost feel the two shift. And then after that, everything's kind of weird. But they found most of the customers complaining about how it felt. They were talking about right from 0 mile an hour acceleration. So Toyota went ahead and they did this planetary gear set with some clutches, which means now they need a little tiny valve body. They need a pump, to just like an automatic transmission. They may even use a torque converter, because if you're thinking about a regular CVT, there's a couple ways to allow it to slip. You could loosen up the sheaves and then the belt would slip in the pulley, and that would give you kind of almost like the ability to come to a stop. Or if you're going to do something more like this, you're probably going to do a full-on torque converter, so that the torque converter can provide, the necessary stoppability, like the you don't have to push a clutch pedal kind of thing. And so that's what I'm saying. We've got somewhere in between a traditional CVT and an automatic transmission with Toyotas. And so some CVTs use a traditional torque converter, Toyota does. And so there's a lot of different things. There's a lockup. Potentially, if it didn't have a torque converter, we could disconnect the input shaft through a clutch. And the clutch would be activated hydraulically, but not by a clutch pedal. it would use the CVT pump and some solenoids. So it's kind of interesting. A pressure transducer is something you may actually see on the ASE. All that is, it's a sensor that changes pressure into a voltage. So basically it's a pressure sensor, but they call it a pressure transducer. It's just it's like, if it's a pretty extensive pressure sensor that can do a big range, a lot of times they'll call it a transducer. Whereas the map sensor, they may not call the map sensor a transducer. It's got this tiny little window, but a fuel pressure sensor or a oil pressure sensor, or in this case, a CVT pressure sensor, they may call transducers. It kind of means the same thing. And so that's the main deal. This belt's worn, this belt's new. This sheave is bad because it has a groove. So you'll notice in automotive, we have a lot of the same things. I mean, we're looking for things that are worn, things that are damaged. You have to know the part and what it does and how it works. Here's a seal on the piston. So a lot like an automatic transmission transaxle. Basically in automotive, what we're doing, how the system works. You have a theory as to what's failed. You'll go in and you'll do a visual inspection, measurements, essentially break it down and find what's failed and say, hey, this failed part, would this cause my symptom? Yes, then you repair it, right? So not even really that hard, I think. And so there's CVT. You guys got any questions on CVT? Otherwise, we're going to roll it right into hybrid transaxles to start. You love the CVT life. You're all going to be having CVTs because you love them. We could do this a couple ways. Let me check something real quick. I really want to use the Toyota one mostly because the Toyota one's good, but actually, we're gonna run through the textbook first, and then I'm gonna do the Toyota one. So I was looking through some of these to get ready because there's a few things that you definitely need to understand. So hybrids, who's pumped? Who loves hybrids? I have a hybrid. I like hybrids. Now, first off, I have candy still left over. So whoever answers this question in the chat first is going to get the candy. What makes a hybrid a hybrid? Go ahead. In the truest definition of the word, a hybrid vehicle is
Different power source.
Oh, what about the chat? You stole it. So
Oops.
multiple power sources. Christian's right. Multiple power sources, all that means. So when I say the term hybrid, I don't mean I love tiny, slow, underpowered, fuel efficient, 4-door Toyota, probably silver cars. I'm just saying I like hybrids. The reason I like hybrids because I can differentiate, right? I can have an engine and electric motor. I can have, a mountain bike that's a hybrid would be I can pedal the mountain bike or I can get electric assist, right? Like hybrid in itself is actually pretty cool, I think. So just the hybrid alone, I like. Now, some of what comes along with calling it a hybrid, maybe not quite so exciting. So from there, if you understand that's what hybrid really means is just multiple power sources. Let's jump into it. So primary, gasoline, and electric hybrids is the most common. Diesel electric hybrids actually, in my opinion, has at least as much promise. I think it'd be better in some ways. Yeah, a generator, for example, would be a huge upgrade to have a diesel electric generator than a gas electric generator. We talked a little bit about diesel, but one of the things that a diesel has an advantage, well, diesels are built really strong, but also a diesel is made or more made to be able to just run at a very steady RPM. And a diesel makes more torque at low RPM. So you could have a diesel running at 1500 RPM, making a ton of torque. And that ton of torque could be driving a generator, right? Like the electric aspect of a generator, which would mean if it were a gas one, to get enough torque, we may have to rev the gas one up to 4,000 to drive the electric part of the generator. Which one would you want running outside your house at night? Anybody? Gas or diesel? And why?
Diesel,
Why the diesel?
because there's more torque at lower RPM.
So 1500 RPMs outside your window is going to sound a lot quieter than 4000 RPMs outside your window. Additionally, 4000 RPMs, running generators, they run for hours. If you were to be in a hospital, right, that hospital can't have a power outage. Everybody would die. So a hospital, the power goes out, that generator is going to run for as many hours as the power's out. If it's 8 hours, 12 hours, or 3 days. If it's in a hurricane zone and they lose power for a week, or Puerto Rico, which some places like were out for a year, that diesel can run fairly quietly, like for long periods of time. Whereas the gas engine, you wouldn't want to like go out to your car and put a brick on the gas pedal and come back in 3 days, would you? Does that sound like what you'd want to do? Is just rev the gas engine up to 4,000 for like 48 hours?
Oh, hell no.
Yeah, do it. They're not really made for that. So to me, the diesel has a whole lot of promise, but trying to convince a customer to get a diesel, not every gas station has diesel. Diesel kind of smells. When you get gas on your hands or something, like it kind of evaporates. Diesel's more oily. It's going to stay there. If you spill a little bit of diesel, it stays there. It doesn't evaporate like gas. But I also like it because, 6 months, gas is pretty much bad. So I have a generator that was gas, and then it was like, power didn't go out for 6 months, and then next thing you know, the power's out, and I go to start it, and the gas is bad. You know what I have to do when the gas is bad? Drain all the gas.
Lines.
Yeah, I gotta drain all the gas out, clean it out, maybe even take the carburetor apart and clean it. And then I gotta go get new gas. And then I bring the new gas back, and by then probably the power's on, and it's like, why do I have this generator? Like I needed it and it wouldn't run because the gas was bad. So to me, a diesel one would be much better for a lot of reasons. But for a hybrid vehicle, generally we don't have them sitting for that long. So what I actually did on my generator, you probably think I'm lying. I converted it to propane. It's really not that hard. Propane lasts forever. You guys know, you have a propane bottle under a grill, you come back to it a year later, propane don't care. Propane's still good to go. So I converted to propane. So now, whatever, I got a ton of propane I can run anytime.
Propane and propane accessories.
Yeah, such as Harbor Freight Predator 8750 generator conversion kit. Indeed. And then the last one, and this one is really cool, and gets a little bit closer to what I said about propane, a fuel cell vehicle. Now, fuel cells come in a lot of shapes and sizes, but let's talk about the Toyota Mirai. The Mirai uses hydrogen fuel to basically, it uses a membrane, and it splits the hydrogen electrons off and has them do work. So this hybrid Mirai is really a fuel cell car, but it's a hydrogen electric hybrid. So it's kind of weird, but the hydrogen basically charges the battery and then the battery drives the motors. So it's kind of a funny way to do it. But the cool thing is, again, just like kind of propane, you could put hydrogen in a compressed cylinder and leave it for years. And then boom, it'll be good to go. The other cool thing is if you're driving, let's say the new Hummer EV, or maybe a little bit more lame, like how about the a Nissan Leaf, or maybe a little more cool. How about a Tesla Model 3? Because they're not really all that much money. If you're driving one of those, you're gonna be, let's say, going to I don't know, you guys, let's say we're going on a road trip to Lake Tahoe. I don't know exactly how many miles that is, but there's a good chance you're not going to be able to make it on your battery electric vehicle, correct? You got to agree with that. Maybe close on some of them, but I don't think you're going to make it. I just don't. So now what are you going to do? How are you going to plan your trip? What are you going to do? I'm
I'm gonna go rent the semi.
No came out? All right. How about I'm looking on my list. How about Luis Vallejo? Luis. Hello, Rico Suave. No, Luis. Luis is sleeping. How about?
My bad. I was moving the car for a street sweeper. What was the question?
It wasn't even you, Armando, but I'll give it to you anyway.
Oh, okay.
It was Luis. He's asleep. So if you're going to drive your battery electric vehicle, such as a Tesla or a Nissan Leaf, how are you going to make it to Lake Tahoe?
You got to stop like at a hotel or motel that has a battery. I mean, a charging station.
Yeah. And how long do you think it's going to take to recharge your, we'll call it a Tesla.
Maybe like, well, don't they have like quick charging? So maybe like an hour or two.
If you could find a rapid supercharger, you're right. But if you find, do you know how long it would take if you were to just plug it into the wall, like a 20 amp outlet?
Probably like overnight, 8 hours or something like that.
Yeah, like probably closer to 12 hours. So, there's, you would hopefully at least go to one that has a 220, we call it 220, but it's really 240 volts at 50 amps charging station. And that will give you close to 20 miles per hour of charging. So if you want to go all the way back up to 300, you're talking 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 5. Yeah, I mean, you're still looking at potentially like maybe up to 15 hours to charge it all the way to be able to go another 300. So you'd hope you could find a supercharger, right? And old Elon is doing a pretty good job of putting in all these superchargers, and you get, I know they're the one by me. I know where it is. I mean, it's a half an hour from me, but by me. You can use, but I was talking to some people. I'm like, hey, what's with the charging station at the Temecula Promenade Mall? And they're like, shoot, you can never get a charger there. There's like on some of the weekend days, like I guess it's pretty slammed. And I know the really big one was halfway up north at a place called something Ranch. I can't think of where it is, but it's halfway to San Francisco. At that place, they put charging stations in. There were people fighting over the charging stations. They'd literally go up to the charging station, plug their car in on the supercharger. They'd walk away for half an hour and go get some coffee. They'd come back and find someone ripped the plug out of the car and started charging their car. And so it was kind of a mess. So the fully electric vehicle thing, I think, has a lot of potential, but everyone would need to have a charging station at home. And I don't know how you do that for someone who maybe lives like in an apartment area with parking on the street. I don't think it's an option for them. But for someone who lives maybe more in the suburbs or in maybe in an apartment with an assigned parking space, you could do it. You could always have it charged. It could work for your day to day, no problem. But I mean, if you're going to go on a long trip, you may go rent a car to go on your long trip. And so it's kind of like, why am I going to have this car, but then I can't do all my needs with this car? And that's deep in our culture, by the way. You'll see a ton of people who have a vehicle with all these equipment and features and things that they may not actually use, but to not have that would mean that we can't do the things we want to do, even if we're never really going to do them, right? So you see a lot of people with they'll go out and they'll buy a 4Runner with 4-wheel drive, and they don't even know how to use the 4-wheel drive. And you'd say, why'd you get it? Well, in case I want to go to Big Bear and go skiing. Like, have you ever skied? No. And it's not that it's foolish. It's just, we don't really want to be told what we can and can't do. Even since you were a little kid, you didn't like that. I didn't like that either. Wasn't a very nice kid. But I don't want to be told, no, you can't take that dirt road because you have a car that can't do it. And so you'll see that's really pretty set in our culture. So for that reason, it's going to be pretty hard to get the EVs to really take off, because someone is always going to say, well, then I can't drive to Las Vegas and back in the same day. I'm like, okay, but you're not going to do that anyway. But I don't want to be told what I can and can't do. See what I'm saying? No, I'm right. I know, because I feel kind of a similar way. I tend to try to take my emotion out of it, but the reason you don't see me on a zero electric bike is because their range is like 120 miles at the speeds that I need to do, which would mean the days where I hit as many dealers as I couldn't do that. So I'd have to like bring my bike to work and then leave it on a charger. What if I brought my bike to work and then I got an emergency phone call from home and my bike wasn't charged yet and I can't make it home? I'm not even going to touch it. I won't even get involved. I'm not doing it. Now, when I visited the dealers, has anybody ever pumped gas into their car twice in the same day? It's not real common, but has anybody? No one?
Pumped gas twice in the same day?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Knew
So
it. Mammoth.
it's not real common, right? But when let's say on Thursday and Friday, I leave my house, boom, I go to Costco, I filled it, then I hit a bunch of dealers, and then on the way home, I could not make it. I had to stop and fill it again, but I couldn't make it to Costco. So I only put like a gallon in it so that I could make it to Costco and then fill it with the cheaper gas. But the point is, if you ever have to do that, you can't do electric. So the electric is really making their goals to be like a similar range to a gas vehicle on a tank. So if you get 250, 300, 350 miles on a tank, that's pretty good. But if you were on a road trip or you were trying to do like a lot of miles, all you need to do is pull in the gas station, slam another whatever gallons in there, and you're rolling. On an electric, no. Now, maybe they'll come out with some of these really crazy charging systems, but as of right now, it's not even remotely similar to the 5 minutes it takes you to pump gas. Maybe a
How much
couple
is to
hours.
pump your how much is it to fill up your tank?
It holds 5 gallons. So you figure about on a daily basis, I pump about 11, 10 to $14 is like, that's full.
So you filled up a gallon at Arco to fill up 4 gallons at Costco.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking, to spend $14.
No. Think about it like this. Costco is 30 cents cheaper a gallon. Okay, so right off the bat, you're not talking about much, but it's every single day. So 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. It's $1.50 to fill up at Costco versus someplace else. But what you got to recognize is with the Costco store card, I get 4% cash back additionally. So we might be talking about $2 a day savings.
If it makes $1, it
Callum.
makes sense.
$2 a day every single day. Think about this: me pumping Costco at gas rather than pumping Costco at El Cheapo could be potentially, half of that breakfast I get every morning. Okay. Then combined with the coupons, I'm showing you the way, right? You know what I'm saying? So think about that. Then think about a fuel cell. If you had a hydrogen fuel cell, you could pull into a place, they could fill your hydrogen tank in about 10 minutes. So it's not quite as fast. Gas, boom, 5 minutes, no problem. But hydrogen, 10 minutes, that's still pretty good. So Toyota banked a lot of money on a fuel cell vehicle being the replacement. Can you see why now? You don't have to wait. You pull in, they basically pump it with hydrogen, and just like gas, and you're good to go, like gone. Now, why hydrogen fuel cell? Why is hydrogen fuel cell so much better than, let's say, diesel or gas?
Less emissions.
Zero emissions, straight up nothing. So a hydrogen fuel cell pollutes nothing at all. And hydrogen is the most abundant element on Earth. So it's truly renewable. You hear the term renewable energy. What that means is if we pull oil out of the ground, whether in our country or someone else's, or we buy it from them or whatever, if we pull it out of the ground and then we refine it and then we make it into gas, propane, diesel, jet fuel, all these things, well, we consumed it and now we have less than we had when we started, right? So these oil reserves take a long time to build up, but we're just going to pump them. We're pumping them way faster than new oils being created. So it's what they call a non-renewable. We can't renew that oil, really. We can't. It just takes too long to be formed. So when you hear the term renewable energy, if you think of hydrogen, we could basically take hydrogen, purify it, consume it in a fuel cell, and what drips out the tailpipe? A little bit of water, a couple other little gases, but it's no emissions, and we can actually, again, pull the hydrogen out of that stuff. So we could pull hydrogen unlimited. We could just keep getting hydrogen all the time. We could power everything on hydrogen for indefinitely, forever. So you see why it's a renewable fuel. There's a lot of positives. Hydrogen is exceptionally clean, and it's available everywhere. You want to know the negative? It's always a negative. Anybody already know it? Hydrogen itself is very inexpensive.
The car is expensive.
The car's kind of expensive. So when I was in school, Chevy came out with a Chevy Equinox fuel cell. And what they were actually doing, you were putting water in a tank, and the fuel cell itself had like a support system to split the water, split the hydrogen out of the water, and then use the hydrogen. And that vehicle was a $1 million prototype. So that ain't happening. But the Mirai, very different, and much more practical. The Mirai, you have to add pure hydrogen. And then the car is pretty inexpensive. You figure Mirais were selling for 30 grand, given they had a bunch of federal rebates and stuff. But even if you figure, we're still in the ballpark there. Even if it's 40 grand, we're still in the ballpark. The negative, though, is the Mirai needs pure hydrogen to work. And you don't just walk out and find pure hydrogen, right? What's the most What's the most common thing that covers the face of the earth? Garbage. No, it's not garbage. Something else. Grass. No. Come on. Covers the majority of the face of the earth. You
Water.
know that. Correct. H2O. Wait a minute. H, that's hydrogen. But also O is oxygen. The Mirai can't burn water. The Mirai can burn hydrogen, but to get the hydrogen, we need to separate it from the oxygen. We need to take the water and we need to split hydrogen from it and leave just oxygen. Now that's fine and it's clean, but it takes energy. So to create the hydrogen fuel, we need to put energy into a process to split it. Okay. Where's that energy come from? See what I'm saying? So what I'm saying is it takes power to make power. Kind of the lesson in life. It takes money to make money. If you don't have any money, you're not employable. You can't make any money. If you want hydrogen, cool, but you need power to make hydrogen to power your car. So the cost associated with hydrogen is more extracting the hydrogen, making the hydrogen separate from whatever it was. So if you think about it, give me some ideas of how we can pull hydrogen out and then burn it or consume it or, use it in a fuel cell. I know, we could use a big diesel electric generator. Oh, I know. We could use electricity from the grid. Electricity from the grid is probably not real clean. You don't really know how that electricity is made. It may be made in a coal powered, electric generation plant. It could be nuclear. It could be, well, everybody gets excited, but wind and solar. Well, wind and solar don't make the majority of electricity in the country. So if you think about that, if you have a solar grid, everybody loves solar. Solar's cool. If you have a big solar grid, oh yeah. I drive a hybrid and it's powered by electric. Okay, cool. Well, where'd the electric come from? Solar. So did you charge your car all day? No, I charged it at night. Do you think the solar's working at night? The solar ain't working at night. Solar doesn't work at night. So during the day, even if the power company wanted, during the day, they could make a lot of solar and pump it into the grid. They buy it from homeowners. Some of you, if you haven't, maybe you buy your first house, you put solar on it, you feel good. Well, you can sell that solar back, although they give you almost nothing for it, by the way, just saying. You could pump the solar into the grid. But the thing is, then when the sun goes down at night, your solar's not making anything. The grid's going to feed your house. Nobody's solar's making anything at night. So where do you think that electricity is coming from? They're running big generators and stuff. They got a big electrical power plant. So, just to give you a little perspective, people may drive a zero emissions vehicle. People may drive the electric vehicle. They may drive a hydrogen fuel cell Mirai, but whether they're charging their car directly overnight, they don't exactly know where that energy is coming from, or whether they're buying hydrogen and putting into their car and they got a nice smiley if you love the environment, which I do too. They bought hydrogen that was made by electricity that was questionable. See what I'm saying? So either way, nobody gets out of the thing perfect. Nobody's getting out of it that clean. Just the way it is. Now, which one's better or worse? I don't really know. I just don't. That's not our call. None of you know either. You could have an opinion, and you are entitled to your own opinions, but you're not entitled to your own facts. I heard that one. I took that one. So the whole hybrid electric fuel cells, it's good. It's good technology. It's a good direction, but it's not like a huge total fix. we still got some issues. And so I don't know if I had to pick any one of these. The only reason I'd hold back on a fuel cell is who knows where there's a hydrogen fueling station near you. Yeah, there's not too many of those. Who knows where there's a Circle K?
Out and found Turkey. Actually, wait, no, there's one up the street from my house.
Yeah, there's always a Circle K. If there's not a Circle K, there's 7-Eleven. If there's not a 7-Eleven, there's an Arco. But if
Polar
you have-
pops over big gulps.
yeah, I mean, and typically a hydrogen fueling station probably doesn't sell big gulps. They probably sell like a kombucha juice or something, kombucha smoothie. So that would probably be my no reason for a hydrogen, because then I'm really limited to where I'm gonna fuel it. Did you know to get the Mirai, you had to go you had to be approved by Toyota. They had to look at where you lived, where you worked, where the hydrogen fuel cell charging station was, and everything. You couldn't just go in and buy one right off and they were only sold in California. That's it. It was a test model for them. It still is. They're still out there doing their thing. It's actually, they did a really good job on the vehicle. The lacking part is the infrastructure. If every single gas station ended up with a hydrogen fueling station, I think it'd be pretty good. But is that going to happen? I don't know. And neither does Toyota, by the way. At this very moment, it seems like people are going more towards electric. You're seeing more and more electric cars every day. And honestly, although Tesla's not my favorite company, I like it because it's American made, and they're the ones really pushing on it. If not for Tesla, I don't know that we'd be seeing quite as much electric vehicle push as we are. So, right now it looks like electric, straight up battery electric vehicles are pulling ahead in the race. But I don't know if that'll stay true. If 50% of Americans had an electric vehicle and they were 95% of those were being charged overnight, our grid can't support that, right? We can't do that. That our power grid can't support that type of rapid charging with that many people that widespread. So I don't really know what exactly is going to happen, but right now, for someone with a nice big solar system and an electric vehicle, and maybe a little Tesla tattoo on their lower back, it's looking pretty good. I'm just saying. And then the old tried and true gas. It's just really tough to say. It's just tough to say. So let's talk some more. Here's one of the most basic hybrid functions. Anybody got idle stop on their vehicle? Auto start stop. They have a lot of different names. Anybody got one of those? If you got one of those, go ahead and raise your hand. Nobody, huh? Nobody's got an auto start stop feature? All right, well, who's at least driven them and familiar with them?
Me.
Yeah, me too. So my Hummer don't have that. My motorcycle, it has it because I do it. So it's not auto start stop. But if I go to a red light and I know it's like a 1-minute red light, I shut it off. And then I look on the side of the lights, right? The lights that are for the other cars. I look on the side of those, and when I see it turn yellow, boom, I get my bike going, then it turns red, then my light turns green, and I'm going. It's not an auto start stop. I just manually do it because why am I going to sit there idling? You might want to do it in a car because you have AC in your radio and crap, but on my scooter, it's just me. And I don't have no AC, and I don't have a radio, so why have it running? I just shut it off. Saves me a little tiny bit of gas, maybe about 1 mile per gallon. So additionally, it gets a little bit less hours on the engine. So idle stop is a good basic function. One of the things that drives me crazy though are the ones where the regular starter starts it. And that's how my bike is. But if you hear a car, you all of a sudden hear the starter engage real quick and then it's running. I just don't want to hear that starter. I can't help but think like that starter is going to go bad because it's being used 100 times a day rather than like twice a day. Because on a basic car, right? You start it, you drive to work, you park it, you get finished with work, you start it, you drive it home, you park it. The starter ran 2 times. On a start stop, that starter starts and stops all the time. So they can use the actual engine starter motor, but they also have other types too. Here's an interesting point too. If you have an automatic transmission and your engine shuts off, you lose your transmission fluid pressure, which means when you go to press the gas pedal at the green light, it may take a little while for the engine's going to start and the hydraulic pump's going to get going, and then it's going to pump up your clutches and bands, and then you're going to go, right? But that may take a second, and we ain't going to wait no second. So what a lot of them have done, they've actually put in a little electric, added on electric fluid pump. So that way, when you shut your engine off, this little electric fluid pump goes, and it just keeps all the clutches and bands and everything pressurized so that when your vehicle's restarted, boom, there's no delay. So this is an added part on an auto start stop vehicle. The auto start stop vehicle is not just something that like got a little program in it. There is hard parts that need to be installed, such as that pump. Here's the thing I want to talk about, but just in 1 second, I wanted to show you a little bit about this. There's a belt alternator starter system. They call it different things. Sometimes they call it a BSG, belt starter generator or whatever. But this system here has this huge alternator type thing. And this alternator is, look what they say, a belt driven alternator and starter. So kind of what that's for is if it's an auto start stop, this part right here, it says running is the alternator, but then if it stops, this part can take from the high volt battery, which in this case may be 42 volts or so, and this BAS can actually turn the belt. If it turns the belt, what's going to happen, Xenon? Xenon. Brian Serrano.
Yes, sir. You said if the bell turns,
Yeah, exactly.
it's gonna start the vehicle.
Exactly. That's why, to me, I actually like these systems because if it has auto start stop, you'll hear it shut off. And then when you go to take off at the green light, all of a sudden the engine's running. You don't hear, boom. Like, I think this is a better way versus the regular starter. Normally, I'd show you one of these because, we have a couple similar different setups, but this is actually what our Jeep has, but it has a more advanced version. This is a belt alternator starter. Ours has a BSG, belt starter generator. And basically what it does, this can be an alternator, like a generator, or a motor. So if you think about that, what if I were to power this thing as a motor and have it help turn the belt while the engine is trying to accelerate? Could we get an extra power boost?
Yeah.
So that's what, when we went to look at Jeeps, first off, I don't do the Chrysler thing. I don't have nothing to do with Fiat Chrysler, FCA. You look out there, literally before we got this Jeep a year ago, I had nothing except for cars with GM V8s. Now, if that ain't American, I don't know what is. Okay. But when we were starting to look at this, we're thinking, it is kind of stupid. Like, let's get something fuel efficient. She loves the Rubicons. So I said, that'd be cool. But I really want to get something that's a hybrid because, I kind of want to save gas. And plus, I want to learn the technology a little better. So we got the Wrangler Rubicon, and the option was a 6-cylinder or a 4-cylinder. And we drove both. And to my surprise, the 6-cylinder has much worse gas mileage. The 4-cylinder turbo has much better. But to my surprise, the 4-cylinder was a lot faster, like significantly faster from acceleration. And if you look at the horsepower of the engine, it really shouldn't be. It's like 270 horsepower to like, I don't know, they're close. The 6-cylinder and the 4-cylinder horsepowers are pretty close. But the 4-cylinder felt way faster. You want to know why? It had this e-torque system, which is a 48-volt lithium-ion battery to that belt starter generator. It's not an option on the 6-cylinder. So it's got this big device on it. And when you're accelerating, it can provide up to 76 foot-pounds of additional torque. That's a lot. People talk about putting a supercharger or something on, like an electric belt starter generator type of a thing like this will provide like instant double-digit kind of big torque numbers right off the bat. So accelerating, that thing it goes. I'm embarrassed to say, on the way home, I drove her to, we went to go pick it up in my Hummer and then drove it home. And so on the one red light, we hit it. The freaking Jeep walked away from my Hummer. I was not happy and embarrassed, but it's the truth. And my Hummer's a 300 horsepower, 5.3 liter, and she's got this freaking 4-cylinder Wrangler, and it walked my Hummer. I'm like, what the? But hey, technology has some advantages, and that thing does have a little giddy up. Now, to be clear, do you think that this type of a device can drive the vehicle on its own? I'm going to tell you the answer is no. So that is what we would call a mild hybrid. So that Jeep is a mild hybrid because it has an additional power source, but it's low voltage and it can't operate the vehicle, right? So that's one of the things. Then additionally, we may use the hybrid system to smooth out how rough sometimes an engine is. We could do, quite a few different things. We've also got that regenerative braking, which we covered a little bit last semester, where it's like, if you're going down a long hill, rather than wearing out your brakes, let's do regenerative braking and charge the battery. Torque assist is what I was describing on the Jeep. We can literally use the electric motor and the engine to drive the transmission. And that's going to be, give us some additional torque. The Prius is really good at this. The Prius, which we'll cover, can use MG2 to drive the wheels, but it can also couple the engine in, and it can use the engine and MG2 both to drive the wheels. In case you guys haven't noticed, this Priuses aren't really that slow for being an engine that makes like 90 horsepower or something. They move pretty good because they'll use both the engine and the electric motor in the Transaxle MG2. So
He got away from the cops in the one commercial.
yeah, that's true. That is true. I mean, that was fake, but that is true. And so this is another advantage: electric only propulsion. So this is where it gets a little tricky and confusing. Electric only means just that. It means the battery can power the electric motor and move the vehicle. So that's, in other words, on a Toyota, they call this EV mode. Have you ever seen that little button, EV mode? So on EV mode, it can actually drive the vehicle silently. There was a really funny episode of The Office back when I used to watch TV, where, I don't know, Andy and Dwight were fighting over Angela. Angela. And so, like he said, Dwight drove the Trans Am. It was kind of a hoopty, but he said, meet me in the parking lot. We'll settle this. And basically Dwight's like trolling around and looking, and Andy sneaks up with the Prius in electric vehicle only mode, so he can't even hear him. And they're all watching, and they're like, "Why isn't Dwight turning around? Andy's right there." And they're like, "But it's in a Prius, and from 0 to 5 miles an hour, it's electric only, and it's silent." And then Andy actually runs him into the fence, like pins him there. So, before that, people, no, people didn't understand the Prius. When I was talking to my architect, he said he remembers when he saw his first Prius, he was he drove a Dodge Ram, and he went into the Toyota dealer to see what they had, and literally he almost got hit because there was a Prius in electric mode and he didn't hear it, and he's like, "What the heck? How's that car driving?" And it was like it was a new thing. So it's pretty cool. This is one of my favorite parts would be just being able to sneak around in electric only mode. But this is a limited range, and depending on how far it can go, they may call it a different thing. So most Toyota hybrids have the EV mode, but it may only be up to 5 miles an hour. But who's familiar with the Prius Prime? Anybody? Nobody? Somebody? Who's familiar with the term plug-in hybrid? Anybody? Nobody?
Yeah. Isn't it more
Yeah.
electric than like hybrid gasway?
Yeah, so it's like this. On an original Prius that was a non-plug-in, you couldn't charge it. On the Prius, on the Corolla hybrid, for example, you can't charge it. You can put gas in it and the gas engine will start up and it will drive MG1, and MG1 will fill the battery, and then MG2 will drive the wheels, but it doesn't have on a normal Prius or on a normal hybrid, basic hybrid, it has no ability for you to be able to charge the battery. The only way to charge the battery is to run the engine, right? And they may be able to do a little bit of electric only vehicle mode, but not much. When they came out with the Prius plug-in in about 2012, you could pop a little lid and you could plug it in and charge the battery. And if you were to drive home and you were to plug it in and charge the battery all the way overnight, you could drive a little further on electric only before the engine started. So in other words, we're saving fuel economy. We're saving gas mileage by plugging it in and charging it. That's the basis of a plug-in hybrid. Not all hybrids are plug-in. Our Jeep is not a plug-in at all. I have no way to charge that battery. The only way to charge the battery is for us to start the engine, and the belt starter generator will charge the 48-volt lithium ion. That's it. I thought about maybe trying to do a hack. There are some aftermarket companies who make an add-on plug-in hybrid system for like a basic Prius or for like the Lexus NX200 or whatever. They make a thing where you can actually add a little lead and plug it in, and you'll start every day with a full high voltage battery, so that you'll get a little more assist. The engine might not start up quite as much, but really the better thing to do is to go to the more modern Prius Prime. So the Prius Prime has a much larger battery pack, and the difference between the Prius and the Prius Prime is this. With the much larger battery pack and it being a plug-in, you can plug it in, you could charge that larger battery pack, and you could drive 80 miles an hour on electric only. So they totally reworked it. So like on a basic Prius, you can do a little EV mode. On a Prime, you can drive full freeway speed on electric only without it starting. And the cutoff number is 26 miles in California to be able to get the best carpool lane sticker. So if you can drive 26 miles electric only, you get a new tier of efficiency, so you can drive in all the carpool lanes for free. 26 miles, people. So I actually think the Prius Prime, although a little ugly, it's actually pretty cool. So we're going to break the Prius Prime out tomorrow and Friday. We're going to practice doing some EV mode. I'm going to have you guys plug it in. Going to look at some of the features. I think the plug-in, to me personally, if you ask what I would get, I probably would lean more towards a plug-in hybrid. That way I could plug it in, you could drive 26 plus miles, electric only. But if you wanted to go to Las Vegas, you just slam gas in it and keep driving. You don't have to charge it, but if you want to save gas, you can charge it. So maybe you charge it overnight when you're going to and from work, but if you're going on like a long road trip, you don't have to really stress about it. Makes sense. So I'd say to me, the plug-in hybrid is one of the best options. And then we're going to cover some of the safety stuff. We won't go too nuts, but everybody knows orange wire bad. Orange wires are your high voltage wires. We'll talk about the different voltage levels. Talk a little about that. I've got a couple things. Well, we call right out the hybrid Prius. This is MG1, it's smaller, and MG2 is bigger. This one's basically the starter and the generator for the alternator. And then this one drives the wheels. This is more like the traction motor. And they have a planetary gear set. And Toyota is pretty brilliant. They made it so that the planetary gear set can accept either the engine, which we now will call the ICE. Okay, so if I say ICE, you know what I'm talking about? Who knows what I'm talking about when I say ICE?
Internal combustion engine.
Internal combustion engine is correct. Ice cream sounds great. Internal combustion engine. We can link the ICE to the electric motor and they can both drive the wheels. So we got this jig set up in the transmission lab where one person can drive the motor, one person can drive the generator, and both of them combined can drive the wheels. So we can do a lot of cool stuff. And so that kind of runs through what MG1 is, what MG2 is. We'll talk some more. What's really crazy is, look, MG1 can drive the sun, whereas MG2 can hold the ring and then the engine can drive the carrier. So it can use all three. We could even maybe start to like move one of these one direction and one the other direction, start to tweak our gear ratios. So we can really do some cool stuff. And Ford does it, a little different. Everybody does a little different. We're going to talk about some of the safety stuff in person. I'll have you guys go ahead and take a high voltage system down. Now, here's one of the more complicated aspects. This isn't a hybrid class. This is a transmission transaxle class, and we're talking about hybrids within that context. So let me explain. If we have problems with the hybrid transaxle, we may actually get DTCs like this, P0AA6 or P3009. Ultimately, what can happen here is, I'm going to take one step back. No, we're here. So what can happen is two things. One, inside of the hybrid transaxle, there's big coils of wire for the motor. And what can happen is we can get an internal open in one of those, or we could have one of them touch another one and they can become shorted. Or the insulation can break down and make it so that voltage can leak out of the insulation. So those are the three main failures of a hybrid transaxle or generally of an electric motor anyway. So there's two tests we want to do. One is an insulation test. So basically what we're doing here, we're doing a megohm tester, which is basically, sometimes they call it a megger. What it's going to do, it's going to put very, very, very high voltage into the leads, and it's going to continue to ramp the voltage up until it senses that the voltage has leaked out the insulation. So if you guys think back to voltage, the higher the voltage, the higher the electrical pressure. We can basically determine how healthy the insulation is. Does that make sense? So if our insulation is kind of breaking down, what do you think our test result would be? Anybody who's following me? If our insulation is starting to fail, do you think it'll take a higher voltage or a lower voltage until the test completes?
Higher.
No, if it takes a higher voltage, that means the insulation can contain the voltage. That would be good. But if we don't get it up to the spec, Toyota would have a spec. I don't know what the volts are, but Toyota would have a spec. If we can't get up to that spec and it starts to leak out before then, that means our insulation is not good enough. Now, how could we put new insulation on our motor? Let me see if I can find a picture of that. We don't have a great one, but I think I remember seeing one back here. Let me give you a nice visual here. So these coils of wire, if one of these sheets of insulation is failing, what do you think our fix is going to be?
Replace it.
Bingo. So when you're trying to diagnose a hybrid transaxle, it may be as simple as doing this Megger testing. You're going to do an insulation test, and if the insulation test fails, the transaxle's bad. But see, it's possible that the failed insulation could be in the body harness, the big high voltage wires, or it could be inside the transaxle. So it's really not that different than what we do on a regular automatic when it's a hybrid high voltage. We need to determine, is the problem outside or is the problem inside? And if you go to these leads, see how there's 3? You could say, let me test the insulation of this phase, and let me test it at this phase, let me test it at this phase. And if they all pass, this one's good. And same with this one, this one, and this one. If they all pass, it's good. But if this one is too easy to jump it, to basically connect to ground, we know that the insulation's failed. We're getting a hybrid transaxle. That's really what we're trying to do. Now, there's another common test that we do, and that is, here's talking about the insulation test still. That's the Megger test. And then one more, I don't remember if it's in here, but I'm going to give you guys some extra worksheets we've been working on. It's called a milliohm test. And basically what we would do, we would measure from, let's say there's 3 phases here, A, B, and C, but they don't use A, B, and C typically. We would test from A to C and see if there's enough resistance between the two. And then from A to B and see if there's enough resistance between the two. And then from B to C and see if there's enough resistance between the two. So what we're basically testing, that's called a milliohm test. We're basically testing how much resistance there is in each one of the coils of wire. And if we were to find one that reads OL, what do you think we're doing? Anybody? One of them reads OL. It should read 10,000 ohms, but it reads OL.
Replacing it.
We're replacing the transaxle. But if we get a code for, a phase open circuit, and we measure all 3 of these and all of them are 10,000 ohms, what do you think the problem is? 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, but we still got a code.
The harness.
Yeah, it's something outside the transmission. Exactly. That's the point. So we have a couple basic tests that we do to determine, is the problem inside the transmission, is the problem outside the transmission. And it's, in my experience, if it's got a messed up big orange harness because they hit some road debris, it should be pretty visually apparent. So you're going to lift it, you're going to obviously inspect all those wires and everything, but the complicated part is really testing inside of the transaxle. But you can see, once we've downed the high voltage system, it's safe. We can actually just do some basic measurements right at the 3 connections. Now, that was my run through on basic hybrid stuff. How'd you guys feel? You feel like you maybe learned a little tiny bit about it?
Nope. Just kidding.
Exactly. You fibber. So what I'm gonna do right now, I really need you to, I argued with the Toyota people, but I really need you to understand a little bit about 3-phase AC. 3-phase AC motor animation.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
are we going to be doing those tests on Friday?
No, we don't even have all the tools to do that. We're in the early rollout stages. We do not have the tools for that at all. So no, but we'll talk about them a little bit more, you know, and I'll show you where the measurements we made, but not quite. So, you know, I found a really simple animation once, but it seems hard to find. Three-phase AC explained. I don't find three-phase to be very complicated, but I want to really like kind of show it to you. I think I put it in the discussion, but well, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's in a discussion, but there's a particularly good video that I remember seeing. I think no. There's 1,000,010 how three-phase AC works. So instead, we're gonna just look at a couple pictures. Okay, we'll go back to the Google. Three-phase AC. All right, well, first off, I'm gonna pull this over here. So there's a lot of stuff on three-phase, generators and whatnot, but what I really want to do is just look at an image. So this one will work. Oops, where'd that go? Here. Okay. So check it out. You guys are very used to DC. On a hybrid, it starts as DC in the battery. Then when we go to drive the motor is AC driven. So anybody who has a motor, anything with electric motor in your house is more than likely an AC motor. Let's think of an example. If you have a refrigerator and the refrigerator runs a little compressor, it uses a motor, it's probably an AC motor. So this is very common for house stuff, a pool pump, the motor in the washer and dryer if they're electric, there's the garbage disposal, a lot of AC stuff. So check it out. You see phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, right? On everything you know, let's say it's a power window motor, you'd expect to get 12 volts in ground, correct? And that's gonna make it run. We agree on that? But remember, that's DC, and DC flows one direction. According to conventional power flow theory, it flows from positive to negative. And if it's flowing from positive to negative, we're just basically keeping the positive positive and keeping the negative negative, and it'll work just fine. Let me get some, I tried to move my list of people because I'm going to call on you whether you like it or not. But then it got in the way. Darn it, this seems to be a piece of junk. Okay, so if you're thinking about, DC, that power window motor, we need 12 volts in ground, right? Let me explain to you something. You're not going to find a ground on a hybrid transaxle. It doesn't have a ground. It doesn't need a ground. Who's confused?
My hand's up.
Yeah, your hand is up there. So here's why it doesn't need a ground. On AC, you're going to have basically this waveform. Let's just focus on the black one for now. It goes positive, it pushes electrons. It goes negative, it pulls electrons. It goes positive, it pushes electrons. It goes negative, it pulls electrons. So on a single phase of AC, all the electrons doing is it's going this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, this way. What that takes is on one end, we're going to make it positive, and on the other end, we're going to make it negative. Let's move it this way. Then guess what we're going to do? We're going to switch positive, negative. Push it this way. And we're going to switch. So see that electron moves back and forth because we're switching on both ends. So this was a pushing, and this was a pulling, and this was a pushing, right? So AC doesn't need a ground. Get what I'm saying? AC doesn't need a ground. It just doesn't need it. It doesn't work that way. we alternate the current positive to negative, and we move the same electrons back and forth to get them to do work. Does that make sense so far? From there, though, if you think about your house, anyone ever repaired an extension cord or cut into a cord or like replaced a cord or something for their house?
Yeah.
How many wires are there?
3.
3.
All right, well, let me explain what those 3 wires are. There's one that we call the hot wire. And then basically that's the one that is gonna kind of like do the work. But we need a neutral because if you think about it, one wire can't really we need 2 to have it alternating. It's a little bit weird to explain, but basically we're trying to push electrons towards the neutral. So that you only really need 2 wires. Then from there, we add a 3rd wire that's the ground, but we don't use that. So if you've ever seen an extension cord, it's got the little plug on the bottom, right? There's 2 like up and down, and there's one middle one on the bottom, and you see it broke off, it'll still work. The problem is if anything shorts out, the ground is there for safety. So if one of these 2 get messed up, it's supposed to go back to the grounding rod rather than go through your hand and shock your butt. Get what I'm saying? So in the house, we only really need 2 wires. We need the hot one that does the alternating, and then we need the neutral. And the neutral, it's a little bit weird for me to explain or even understand. The neutral is just kind of there to allow for the electrons to flow back and forth, but the hot one really is the main one doing the work. It's kind of alternating. That's how your whole house works. But what gets complicated is on 3-phase AC, there's no neutral, there's no ground, there's no nothing at all. The reason we don't need a neutral is this. Normally on a neutral, the neutral kind of acts as like the negative and the hot kind of acts as like the positive. On 3-phase, look at this. The first phase goes high, right? Because we're focusing on how to learn that one. But look at by the time the first phase goes high again, what's on the negative right now? When the phase 1 is at the peak,
Phase 2.
you see this? Phase 2 is definitely on the negative, and phase 3 is kind of on the negative too. So like you understand, we always need a positive and a negative, but on 3 phases, we've got a positive right now. We've got 2 negatives. So current can flow from this one to either one of those 2. Now, what if 3 was on the positive? 3 is on the positive, but look, 1 and 2 are on the negative. Or even if we were right here, 3 is on the positive and 1's on the positive. I mean, 3 is on positive and 2's on the positive, but look, 1 is on the negative. So when we have 3 phases, we always at least have some positive and some negative. So all we really need to do through controllers is basically make, 2 and 3 the positive and 1 the negative. Or if it was like right here, 3 and 1 the positive and 2 the negative. Because for electricity to flow, it always needs a positive and a negative. But on 3 phases, we alternate which one's the positive and which one's the negative, and we always have power coming out. So kind of what this one's showing is if there was only a black one, we'd have power, we'd have no power, we'd have power in a simple explanation. If we had 2 phases, we'd have a little bit of a dip, right? If it was like just these 2, power, but then we'd have no power because 3 is gone. So if we have all 3, look, we've always got a solid positive and we'll always have a solid negative. 3 phases is just right for constantly having a drive. There's no gap. There's always a positive and a negative. Sometimes 2 positives and 1 negative, sometimes 1 positive and 2 negatives, but there's always, it just rolls. It's just smooth and clean. Now, I'll take any questions you have, if you're ready for that. Nothing? Full of crap. You are so full of it. So, go ahead.
No, I really don't know what to ask. So no.
Just to hurt your brain, did you? So with that being said, I want to point something out to you. I'm going to pull up the 274. All right, wow, it's really slow. It's coming along. Okay, there we go. And we're gonna go to oh gosh, I was pretty sure the 274 had the a little bit about the hybrid transaxle. Let's see. Okay, 1 second here. Man, unless my memory's bad and it's in the 260 something. Just one moment. Please, 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 please don't. Okay, I'm gonna look at my L3 folder. Maybe that's where I put it. Yes, it is. Un momento. And dude. Dude. You know, I could actually put up that handbook. That might be pretty cool. I put that up for sure. Gosh, this thing is crazy. The reason I wanted to show you this is because I'll show you where the 3 phases and everything are on Toyota land. 1 second, like really not happy about opening up. So remember, we can't give you guys 071, 072, so you're gonna have to go to the region to get it, which is cool because you'll get, you know, you'll remember some things, but you won't remember that much, and that's okay, because you know you're gonna go through it with them, so it's all good. But talks a lot about some of the basics. I'm gonna have you guys do the test drive tomorrow, but check this out. When you see one of these, I'm gonna show you tomorrow. You'll notice there was always 3 cables going into the transaxle. Who saw that when they did the transaxle work? Do you notice there was always 3 cables?
Yeah.
So right from Toyota, this is where they call it U, V, and W. There's 3 phases on each of the MG1 has 3 phases, MG2 has 3 phases. So just kind of showing like each one of these, maybe this is phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So there's always the positives and the negatives. And then we have, you know, some updates from the previous model to the new model. And this just looks like a big bundle of mess of wires, but it's sort of like, if you figure phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and there's going to be 2 pushing and 1 pulling, or there's going to be 1 pushing and 2 pulling. That's mainly what you want to look at. So like, you guys understand if we're trying to rotate something through this magnetic field, we want either 1 pushing and these 2 pulling, or maybe these 2 pushing and this 1 pulling. If at any point we didn't have at least 1 pushing and 1 pulling, what would happen?
It would stay in one spot.
It would get stuck. It would fail. It wouldn't work. And so that's why, like on a DC power window motor or something, this one's positive and this one's negative, then this one's positive, then this one's negative. But on 3 phases, it's kind of weird. They're rotating through, and 2 of them are pushing and 1's pulling, or 1's pushing and 2 are pulling, just constantly rolling. That's why we don't really need a ground per se. And so that was kind of one of the things I really wanted to show you, and they didn't do the best job, but there are 3 cables here, although you can't see one very well. And then it does talk a little bit about doing some of the tests. So we're not going to talk about battery tests and stuff, but I think it talked about milliohm and megohm testing, but that might have been on the next one. So you see, this is new. I haven't got to cover this one yet. It's kind of unique. Yeah. So, well, that's okay. We're going to do some more stuff when you guys come in, and we'll talk about how we would really test the insulation, so there's the 2 tools. Remember the milliohm tester, which measures really, really, really small variations of resistance through the different phases of wires. Or there's the Megger tester, which is a megohm tester, which is like basically going to put really high voltage in and see when the insulation fails to see if it's good or bad. Those are the 2 main tests. And then the one other thing they mentioned was the resolver. And the resolver is nothing but a speed and position sensor that's extremely accurate and very fast response. And so that's the main thing on the hybrid stuff. We don't have any super crazy heavy lab, but we're going to do some drive, do some road tests, talk about how it works a little bit, and, some of that type of stuff. You guys feel good on hybrid? You feel like your brains are nuked? Are they melted? Are you still alive? So
Just about.
yeah, you're hurting yourself, huh? Well, too bad. I'm gonna keep it real brief. It's just gonna be a little bit about drive shafts and axles. There is some, why didn't open that? There's some assignments and everything for you, discussions and stuff. And there's some chapters, but at least I'll point out a couple of things that I wanted to. Knock it off. All right. It's weird. I'm trying to get this 302 open up. It's being kind of annoying. So give me just 1 second here. It's 8.3. It's in PowerPoint. It's 3. Oh, you know what? It might be in 351. Well, it's in one of the 2. Give me 1 minute. Yes, it's in 351. That's why. So we'll just do a little brief chat about the axles, prop shafts, etc. It won't be bad. It's not anywhere near as complicated. So you guys can see my screen, yes?
Yes.
Very good, man. So let's jump right into drive shafts. We're going to talk all about all this 4-wheel drive and transfer cases and limited slips and all that sort of stuff. But for now, we just want to talk about 2 things: propeller shafts, aka drive shafts, and CV axles. So propeller shafts, that's typically what you see on rear-wheel drive. The drive shaft slides into either the transmission or the transfer case, and then it's got a universal joint, the drive shaft, a universal joint, and then it goes to the rear differential. There's 2 designs. This is typically on a 2-wheel drive. You see this yoke here? It's got splines. It's a slip yoke. That's where remember, I've always explained to you, as the transmission flexes or as the suspension goes up and down, the distance between the back of the transmission and the axle changes. So we need to have a drive shaft that gets longer and shorter. On the 2-wheel drive one, we slide the slip yoke right on the output shaft. On the 4-wheel drive one, we use a flange and we bolt it, which means, who can tell me how is this one going to get longer and shorter if it's bolted up and it can't slide?
Isn't it like rubber or like a part of it? Like a type of rubber or something?
Right here, you'll see a little accordion looking rubber thing.
Yeah.
and that drive shaft itself splines internally and gets longer and shorter. So it's just different designs. You know, this one stays all one length, but it slides in the transmission. This one bolts up on both ends, but it itself slides internally. They get longer and shorter. So that's a big thing. You can see
Wait,
the example of the universal joint right here.
you were explaining how like some people lift their trucks and whatever, and then the two-wheel drive drive shaft pops out. How would the four-wheel drive what would happen to that?
All right, so you do remember that in suspension, huh? Pretty good memory. So I had that student and he did a crappy lift on his pre-runner. And so this was literally sliding out of the back of the transmission and falling on the four-wheel drive one. Probably is going to have a little bit more, range. It could get probably a little longer, but if they didn't put the right drive shaft in and it did stretch too long, it would pop apart internally and you'd have a drive shaft in two pieces. Hopefully both of them could be put back together, but I'm not so sure they could, but maybe. Now these could be made of steel or aluminum. Steel is harder, aluminum's lighter, depends on really what you want. But remember, this drive shaft's going to be spinning, so it needs to be balanced. Additionally, we have two-part drive shafts. Sometimes it's one long piece. Sometimes it's like a front part, a center support bearing, and then a rear part. These provide some different advantages. If you were to look at the long slope of the vehicle, you can see right here, this drive shaft's kind of low right here. If you were to try to go over a rock, the rock might pin it right there. So when they get these really long wheelbase vehicles or vehicles that they kind of want to be more agile, what they'll do a two-part. They'll have the drive shaft stay nice and flat to here, put a support bearing here, and then bring it down a little more steeper. And that way right here isn't like a teetering point, and it provides some other benefits as well. But that's the two-part right here with the center support. Anybody ever heard of that center support bearing? There's another word for it a lot of times. They may call it a carrier bearing. So if you hear the term carrier bearing, they're talking about the center support bearing for the drive shaft. Now, that center support bearing for the drive shaft can go bad. Bearing noises growl. If the bearing noise growls and it is directly proportional to wheel speed, it could be the center support bearing. They're also mounted in rubber, and the rubber can get loose. Now, this is what's going to hurt your brain. The drive shaft needs to be at a precise angle. So when they're talking over here is this drive shaft comes down at an inclination of, let's say, 27 degrees. It comes down at 27 degrees, and then it goes back up at 27 degrees. It has to have the exact angles because this makes a vibration and this makes an equal but opposite vibration. So if we were to have this one at 30 and this one at 20, these vibrations would not be equal. So it's kind of crazy, but we know our drive shaft vibrates. It's just, while this one's vibrating opposite, it cancels itself out. Technically, this drive shaft is trying to speed up more here and slow down more here, so it ends up even. It's really weird. It's called Hooke's joint theory. I have a video that you can watch and answer some questions. For that reason, it's absolutely critical that we have these angles correct, because this is not a constant velocity joint. It's a universal joint, and the universal joints have inconsistent velocities, which need to cancel each other out. Do you have any questions? So this angle right here is controlled by the back of the transmission, and this angle right here is controlled by the angle of the rear differential. So if we don't modify it, we're good to go. If you start modifying your rear axle too much and lifting your transmission up and doing all this stuff, it can make a vibration. Additionally, if our transmission mount were bad, the transmission could lift up off the mount and that could make a vibration, but it may only vibrate in forward or it may only vibrate in reverse. You starting to see why I was saying that the mounts could cause a vibration? Because these angles need to be precise, 30 and 30 or 22 and 22. Whatever the angle is, they need to be precise and they need to be opposite. If the transmission starts to flex, these angles won't be equal and opposite. We'll get a vibration.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
don't you have to also bolt up the drive shaft while the car's on the ground?
There's you don't have to. You could go ahead and you could bolt up the drive shaft with it in the air. There's a lot of different theories. I wouldn't really go with that one. I've bolted a million drive shafts up right while it's lifted. But if you were trying to measure these angles, you need to do it on the ground. So if the car's stock, I would bolt the drive shaft up and don't even sweat it. But if you just did a lift kit or you modified it or you're building like a custom car, you wouldn't want to measure these while it's on the lift. You'd want to measure it while it's on the ground. But while it's on the ground, it's hard to get under there, right? So it'd be nice to measure it on the alignment rack, because you would measure this angle to this angle. And I'm going to show you, we're going to use protractors at school tomorrow on Friday. Then this angle to this angle, but it's got to be with the suspension at rest, because that's really when you're going to drive it. You're not going to drive it with all the weight lifted off and the wheels hanging down. But no, you can unbolt and rebolt one on the lift 100%. However, if you remove one, you may want to make a mark on the back of the flange and a mark on the axle, the differential flange, and bolt it back up where it came off. But even that, I don't see as super critical. What's 100% absolutely critical in every way is if you disconnect this, if you take a drive shaft off to replace a universal joint, you're going to press this universal joint all apart. You need to have made a mark on this and on this, because if you accidentally flip this over, you'll change the balance of the drive shaft and you'll have a horrendous vibration. So that is 100% every time you need to mark and mark. But you can't separate the yoke from the drive shaft unless you take apart the U-joint, the universal joint right here. So typically we're not really too worried about it, but if you got the pencil or a Sharpie right on you and you want to mark both ends, that's good practice. Just may not be critical if you're just removing a drive shaft. But 100% if you're disassembling the U-joint. Makes sense, kind of? Now this U-joint, you'll notice, has these needle bearings and it has a grease fitting. If they have a grease fitting, we're actually supposed to grease those every oil change. Most of the time though, they've eliminated this and they've gone to the sealed type. The sealed types are nice, but not quite as, you can't, if they go bad, you replace them. Whereas on the old style, you could always re-grease it and keep it living a little longer maybe. And so that's kind of what this is showing. Like it's in a phase meaning this part is lined up to this part. And if we were to accidentally flip it, it would be out of phase. So it's a little hard to see, but you see this has got an ear up here and an ear up here. If you were to have it out of phase, you'd have an ear here and then an ear on the backside. That would be out of phase. That would vibrate. That'd be really bad. A special drive shaft shop does a vibration, does a drive shaft balance. We can't do it. Here's an example of the match marks. Mark here, mark here. If you're going to remove it, not a bad idea. Mark the front, mark the back, and then if you're going to disconnect the universal joints 100%, you have to mark them all. What some people will even do, they'll take a little paint and they'll actually run a stripe all the way down the drive shaft. And that way, when they know they put it back together, the stripes lined up, they're good. Also, that'll help you tell if it twists or not. So there's some good info here. Just overall, if you're doing stuff with a drive shaft, make match marks. And that's just to maintain the balance. So if you're gonna pull this flange, if you're gonna pull this yoke, you're gonna pull whatever, mark it. Just mark everything and you'll be good to go. And so if you wanted to measure those angles, you'd measure it on the alignment rack, which is at rest. And then the maximum angle would be with it on a lift with the wheels hanging down. And if they're both in spec, then your whole drive shaft is good, even with all your suspension travel. Now, if you do a different lift kit and now your suspension travel's increased 4 inches, you know, that's when you might get into some vibrations and stuff. And that's why Toyota's sort of like, hey, don't modify your vehicle if you want your warranty, because you start modifying it, we may or may not really want to cover that. Kind of makes sense. And then, you know, the reason we have drive shafts with universal joints is to make up for angles, but this is not how it's supposed to be. It's like, it could do it, but it's not supposed to be that way. And then here's an example of measuring a bent drive shaft. Measuring for U-joint looseness, I just do this by feel, but if you were to have a dial indicator and move it, you could read how many thousandths loose it is. And then this is a turning inspection of how the center support bearing feels, which can tell you about the bearing. Now, that was prop shafts. I want to get into CV axles a bit, and you're gonna build some CV axles tomorrow on Friday. So we talk about CV axles a lot. We do work on CV axles a lot, but you don't exactly know why. What the heck is the term CV? Anybody know what CV stands for?
Constant velocity.
So a universal joint needs equal but opposite angles because a universal joint has inconsistent velocities. And while this one speeds up, this one needs to slow down to cancel it out. A CV joint, a constant velocity joint, keeps the speed constant. So CV joints are basically much better. They're much better. They're more expensive, but they're much better. They're gonna have a constant velocity. It's not that critical that we have the exact angles all the time. So that's the deal with the CV joint. That's what it looks like. It's got an outer joint. It's got an inner joint. If you look right here, you know, this vehicle just, you know, hit a speed bump and the suspension is kind of like, you know, traveling upward. This joint.
Hella flush.
Yeah, hella flush here. These two joints are going to do their thing. The main purpose of this joint here is to plunge. It's going to expand and contract. So as that axle went up, this axle needed to get longer. And so this one's going to plunge. This one here is going to get the angle right. But either way, both of them are constant velocity joints. So neither are going to make a vibration. And so this wheel, every time we hit a bump, is going to move. That means these axles are all over the place. We absolutely need a CV joint there. And here's what it looks like. So if you look at the outer joint, they call it a Sheppa joint, RZEPPA, you'll notice the ball and the groove, the balls can rotate in the groove and keep basically this type of angle the same. Anywhere it goes, it'll be a consistent speed. It's really nice how they work. It's simple, but the ball and the groove can get messed up. So what we do, we put the boot around it and we fill it with a special grease. So if the boot were to rip, the grease flies out, our Sheppa joint gets damaged, or our inner joint, or any joint can get damaged. So we have the inner joint. The inner joint is here. We have the outer joint is here. We have boots on both of them. If a boot is leaking and it makes no noise and no damage, we can reboot it. But who's ever heard an axle doing the clickety clackety thing? Click, clack, 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 clack. Anybody ever heard that?
Me.
That's not because the boot needs to be replaced. That's because the boot ripped, the grease leaked out, moisture got in, and it's damaged the joint. So if you hear damage or you see damage inside, that's done. That CV joint needs to be replaced, which really means it needs a new axle. But if all that's happened is it's in the early stages of leaking and the axle sounds perfect, we could do a reboot and a regrease, but the reboot is kind of hard to do. We need new clamps and we need new grease. We have to take the axle out. We have to disassemble it. And then most of the axles, the outer joints are not serviceable on a Toyota. So if we want to boot it, fine. But if you want to actually change the joint, you really can't. You're going to get an axle. So we can boot either inner or outer. If you want to boot the outer, you can't get this one apart. You have to take the inner apart to get to the outer. So you basically end up booting both. And you're going to practice doing that tomorrow and Friday. And so it's a lot of different types, but we don't need to go super crazy. Just note this inner one a lot of times has like a tripod, and the main purpose of one of these are to plunge and get the axle longer and shorter. So while everybody was doing transmissions, you had to slide your axle back in. You notice that inner one plunges a lot. You know, that's the hard one to get out of the transmission transaxle sometimes. You kind of pop it back in there. If you pop it out too far, what you're doing is you're pulling the trunnion and the roller outside of the tripod, which is like the groove for it. And that's kind of damaging it. And you might be able to get it back in, but it probably did damage it at least some. So we don't really want to extend those too far if we can help it when we're doing transmission work. Sometimes if you know you're going to stretch them out, it may be worth just take the axles out, put them on the ground where they're safe. And watch it. If you have something sharp, you might pierce this boot. And if you put the tiniest hole in that boot, you won't see it. But by the time the car's going 70 miles an hour, there's so much centrifugal force, the grease will start to fly out and leave little green, greasy blobs all over the wheel, all over the suspension, near the rotor. If you start to see those green little greasy blobs like they've been getting flung out, you got a leaking boot. It needs at least a boot or maybe an axle. And so that's the main run through. You guys got some discussions to do. So I don't mind letting you go a hair early to make sure you catch up on those. But while we're talking about it, let's make sure you understand what you're doing. So we just chatted about hybrid and CVT. There's a couple chapters there. This is totally optional. There's the A2 stuff you're working on. I did put in the hybrid resources, but I'm going to add some more. And then the manual transmission book, we're just now starting CV joint and axles and drive shaft and U-joints. So you got quite a bit on your plate, but you should be able to make it happen. You guys got any questions? You know what you're supposed to be doing? You make this happen, you get it done. Don't forget to submit your A2 results. Pass or fail, I need the results. Any questions for me before I send you to do your work? I'm kicking you guys off. I'll put up the recording pretty soon. I gave you the recordings for the study sessions, but I'll also add those to Canvas in a special place.
Wait, Kelly. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I kind of see leaking CV boots a lot.
Yeah.
You said you can just recommend the reboot and the regrease, but you
If
said they're
there's-
also.
If there's no damage at all, then yes. But if they're making any noise or there's anything, then no.
Okay.
Continue.
Oh, because I was just trying to sell the reboot, but
Did they buy
I
them?
wasn't sure. Never.
Yeah, the reboot's good. I mean, if you drive the car in and when you turn it, you hear a noise, or if you're driving it, you're hearing clicking and clacking, it may be like, hey, we might be able to reboot this, but I heard a noise. I think the axle may be, it may need a new axle. You could always pass that information on. And yeah, no, that's good. That's a good thing to at least write up. And they may always tell the customer, hey, we're gonna need to check it out before we can tell you if it's a reboot or a new axle. But that's the big thing. It's sort of like an engine. If you run an engine low on oil and it starts to knock, well, the low oil caused it, but if you put oil in it now, you're probably not going to fix it. The damage is done. It's kind of the same. If the joint gets low on grease or junk gets in there, the problem was the boot, but now the joint's probably ruined. So putting a new boot on it isn't going to really fix it. But That's what we got to watch out for.
So you'll hear the clicking on turns.
Yeah, you'd hear it on the outer joint. You hear it on turns because when you turn, the outer joint does a lot of this, right? The outer joint has to follow your steering. So if this was the right side and you were driving, when you steer left, this joint's going to do this. When you steer right, this joint's going to do this. And you'll notice it's more prone to make the noise when you turn. The inner ones can fail too, but they're a little bit harder to identify. What happens on the inner ones is they won't plunge very well, and they can actually give you a vibration. And so typically if it's an inner joint, you'll get a vibration on acceleration and then no vibration on decel. And an acceleration vibration, they'll call it a driveline vibration due to an inner joint that's failed. The reason it's vibrating is because when you, let's say it's front wheel drive, when you accelerate, it kind of stands up in the front, right? That axle's supposed to get longer, but if it's damaged on the inner joint, the plunger joint, it doesn't really want to plunge. It starts to try to plunge, but it's stuck because it's damaged. It'll make the whole car shake like crazy. The second you let off the gas pedal, it smooths out. The second you push on the gas pedal, the steering wheel will be like this. You'll be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, all right, I got a driveline vibration caused by an axle. But which axle? I don't know. You may have to actually remove them and plunge them to find out. So, yeah, that's the whole deal. You guys got this. Good questions. I know you'll have more. So Thursday and Friday, all about drive shafts, axles, and just some about the hybrid transaxle and CVT. So you're gonna have a slam day. I'm gonna have you do a lot of stuff, and you're gonna get it done in the wing bam boom. And then people who haven't done the initial dealer visit, I'll talk with you. I'll even give you some options to see if you want, if you want me to come and do the full on evaluation, I can. Like Akron, you're only there certain days. So we can set up, we'll have to do your evaluation for sure. We can do it sooner, we can do it later, but we can talk about that in the group chat. Sound good, people? So work on your couple chapters, work on your discussions, and make it happen. Kicking you all out.